That's fine. Okay. Excited. Been working on this a long time. Quiet guy. All right. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your participation. Whether you're on a committee, whether you've served in the past, part of Sunday school, just interested. This has been an accumulation of a lot of work and thinking, not only over the past 3 months, but what was framed in Sunday school was also a lot of the questions and things that I had come up with and been really drilling down on during sabbatical too. So in some ways, this is a sabbatical learning or sabbatical processing that I wanted to bring as well. So to start, just an update. If you remember, back in January, I became half-time. So an update on that. On the whole, I think it's been going pretty well. There's been some adjustments, some getting used to different things. A lot of my time has been spent with this presentation that I'm going to give you. A lot of this thinking and processing and really working through some of those details, reading on kind of how to do this strategic planning type of thing. What this kind of comes down to is today is kind of a transition point. So part of the deal with going to halftime, a lot more responsibility. So I didn't want to just say, well, here's what's done, here's what the committees have to do, so now go do it. I want the committees to participate in this. And so really, the committees get to say kind of what it's going to look like to be on a committee, what it's going to look like to be doing this administrative work of the church going forward. So this spring, the adult Sunday school class, we asked questions about our congregation, and it's provided some really good insight into some potential paths forward. We engaged with our hopes, fears, had honest conversation about the challenges our congregation has and does face. We got answers to some direct questions that can really inform the work of the church. Change. The other swear word in the church. Historically, change and tension have gone hand in hand. So which causes which? Change, tension. Okay, so tensions cause change because relationships can be at risk. Because we tend to be reactive and letting outside forces push us around. Changes also cause tension because we tend to be reactive, because we have an aversion to change. There's something natural about that. So let's rethink change. Let's stop thinking about it as a bad word and start engaging with it a little bit. We have here a boat. I know I've said it many, many times in different sermons, so now it's quiz time. What is the one direction a boat cannot sail? Directly into the wind. The only direction a sailboat cannot sail is directly into the wind. If you need to go in the direction that the wind is coming from, you do this back and forth swing. Prepare to come about, and then you go the other way. Prepare to come about. And then the mast swings the other way, or the boom, and you kind of go this back and forth. So if you have to travel in the direction of where the wind is coming from, there is a way to do that. But the only direction you cannot sail is directly into the wind. You can also sail pretty close to directly if you want to, although there's a lot of power. The wind dictates how the mast is set, how the boom is set, how the skims are set, how everything works out, how everything gets set. The boat is constantly reacting to the wind, and the wind propels it. But does the wind determine which way the boat goes? No. No, there's a little rudder. So really, everything, all the sails are set in relation to the wind, and it can be at a complete odd angle of the rest of the boat. And yet, if that rudder is pushing against the water and steering it, it can go in any direction. So we love to look at a boat like this where the sails are straight and it's nice and pretty, but that's not usually the case. Usually the sails are kind of all over the place depending on the direction they want to go and where the wind is. So this is a good model for the church. As I've said many times, the church is a boat. Our structure physically resembles a boat. We are in a boat, and there are winds out there. Now, does the wind determine, does everything out there determine which direction we go? No. We adjust. We put things a little bit askew. We determine that, but we have to work with the wind. So changes cause tension because we have to be reactive, because we have an aversion to change, and because change can feel like a loss. It can feel like we've lost something when something changes. Tensions cause change. Maybe this is a good thing? Is it a good thing when there's tensions that cause us to kind of reassess? Growth happens in conflict. Think about that for a minute. Growth happens in conflict. Changes cause tension. Maybe we can readjust the rudder. When there's changes, does it have to cause tension, or do we readjust the rudder? And keep in mind how you adjust that rudder. There's a lot of force against that rudder. There's a lot of tension there, but that's what's steering the ship. So sometimes that can be good. So we have a choice when the world around us changes. We can be hostile to change, or we can adapt. If we choose hostility, if we choose to resist that change, we're saying one of two things. Either we believe that doing church as we've always done it will weather the storms. If we keep on keeping on, it'll weather the storms. It'll make it through. One of these two things. Both of these require the metrics of success. Okay, both of these require something to be able to measure, to be able to determine an overwhelming amount of these things. We can measure success. Will this increase the number of attendees? Will this increase our influence in the community? Does this help us become better people? Does this make it enjoyable to be together? Does this create a space for us to care for each other? Does this encourage engagement? Does this encourage us to be open-minded? Does this integrate our church life with the rest of the week? Does this help us pay our bills? Okay? This is not from any study. It's not from any book. It's not scientific. This is what discussion led to with the Sunday school class. So take it for what it is, but let's assume for a minute that we can actually take these metrics and apply it to anything the church does. Think about something you really, really like about the church. Apply these metrics Apply it and think through it in this way. Think through, why do I like this? Why do I enjoy this? Maybe it points to one of these directly. Maybe there's other metrics that we can be thinking about. But this at least gives us kind of a foundation, something to think about, something to say, well, let's at least hang our hat on this and apply this and start to think about that. For our congregation, this is a good first step in saying this is what success looks like. So if we assume that is what success means, then we have to ask some questions depending on which side, which approach we're taking to the hostility towards change. So if we believe that doing church will always, as we always have, will weather the storms, then we need to ask the question, what evidence has there been, judging by our metrics, that point towards things turning around by maintaining the status quo? Is there any evidence based on these that keeping on will weather the storm? We also have to ask, what do we see changing in our community context? How might the storm itself change that will meet back at the trajectory of the church? So if you get back to the boat analogy, I want my boat to go over there, the wind's coming from over here. You know what? I'm just going to keep on keeping on and go this direction. At some point, will those vectors meet? Well, actually, yeah, on a globe. But what is telling us about what's going to change? Do we expect the wind to change? If we're choosing hostility to change, and we're assuming that we like the church as it was in the past and we're willing to let it die with us, then we need to create an end-of-life plan based on our metrics of success. We have to look at those metrics and say, here's how we can remain successful at end of life. Does this change our metrics for success, or can they still be met? Do our metrics actually change if we decide we're at an end of life planning stage? Or can we still meet them somehow? Both of these trajectories point to the next steps. If we believe that doing church as we always have will weather the storms, then we need to create a plan for action. What are we going to do to weather the storm in strength? What are we going to do to really weather that storm? What is it going to look like going forward? If we like the church as it was in the past and we're willing to let it die with us, then we need to take inventory of our resources and plan for the depletion of those resources. How are we going to die well? Let's back it up, because maybe we're saying, well, let's not be hostile to change. So if our relationship to change is not hostile, then we need to anticipate the changes that we can and have a plan for adaptation. The wind is coming from this direction. We expect it might change a little bit. So what is our trajectory? How are we setting the sails and the rudder to meet not only what's currently going on, where we're currently being pushed, but with that anticipated change of wind direction, what's going to get us to where we want to go? First step would be creating a plan to change. So we have to ask the question, what changes can we anticipate, and how are we going to adapt to meet them? This is future planning, right? This is thinking out, what are we anticipating is going to happen, and how are we going to adapt to meet those changes? Notice a pattern? In all those options, creating a plan for action, what are we going to do to weather the storm in strength? Taking inventory, how are we going to die well? Creating a plan to change, what can we anticipate? What's the commonality between all of these? Planning. We need to look ahead. We need to make a plan of action. So this is where the work of the committees comes in. Here are the questions for you to be working with. What are you responsible for? What is your committee or your office in the church responsible for? What are you going to do in the coming years? Coming years? What are you looking ahead? What are you going to do? Now, I think the budget gives us a good framework for assessing both of these questions in conjunction. It really breaks down what different committees are responsible for and gives you some good metrics, some good numbers to be able to actually project. Committees have a responsibility not only for their finances or their programming, but as leaders in the congregation. This is the key to this whole way of thinking. You serving in a leadership position in the church, you on a committee are in a leadership position. You have responsibilities, not just for the finances or programming, not just for assigning things or continuing things, but actually as leaders. You are leaders. And even if you're here and you're not currently on a committee, your being here, you're participating and being interested in this and thinking about this means that you are actually a leader as well. If we believe that there are things the congregation needs to let go of, the committees are the best communicators of this. If I say we need to let go of this, we need to stop doing this, we need to get past that, that's met completely differently than the committee responsible for that saying, we need to adjust this, we need to let go of this. If there are things we need to change or invest time or energy in, committees are the best communicators of this. I can put forward as many new initiatives as I want. I have a whole file of documents of things that I've just thrown out there, thought about, planned. They can be loosely held, they can be specific. Every once in a while, I pull one out and throw it at the deacons. Sometimes they take, sometimes they don't. But that means absolutely nothing compared to the power of a committee. The committees being the communicators to say, hey, we need to do this. This would really be a good investment of our time and energy. Means a lot more coming from committees. You'll remember we did the bean allocation here, looking at our budget. And we kind of said, okay, here are the categories. Now disperse your beans how you think that they should actually, how we should invest our time and energy into it. And so these are some real statistics here that really show us where this emphasis is. And look at the difference between where it's at and the actual budget. Now, keep in mind, some things don't take a whole lot of money, but we put a lot of time and energy into it. So there is that. That's a difference to contend with. But consider this for a minute. Our actual budget is over on the right, and how we thought things should be kind of allocated is on the left. Christian education, developing Christian formation, developing our children, our youth, as well as adults. Faith formation, we think that should be 23.5% of our investment. It's 3.2. Trustees, our physical upkeep of the building, the bills, what it takes to actually have a physical space. We think that should be about 15.4%. It's 27.9. Worship, and there's a caveat here because social committee is a single line in this as a subcategory of worship. Worship, we think we should spend about 21% of our resources on that. Right now it's at 1.2. Mission, just giving. This is a lot of just the money that we say, you know what, we need to give this away and support these things. We think that should be about 21%. It's at 14.2%. Deacons, so this would be the deacons part of the budget, includes my salary, everything to pay a pastor, everything administratively. It also brings in some of the taxes, I think, some subscription things, a lot of miscellaneous. But as far as the leadership portion goes, the category is our pastoral ministry. We think that should be about 19%. Right now, it's 53.3%, more than half of our entire budget. Hopefully, do with this what you will. And we're going to get into the details kind of later in the summer, more into the fall, about actually applying some of these. But I want this to be really key in your mind, and especially as you think of the committees that you serve on. What is this saying about the importance of your committee? More? Less? Adequate? Take this into consideration. I want to open it up for any questions, any conversation that you want to have. Any thoughts? Any response? Yeah.
So Michael, is that budget was as of today?
Yes, that is our current budget. Yep. And again, we're not talking exclusively about budget here, but it gives us a really good idea of where that balance is currently. The work moving forward is going to be, it's going to be budgetary. That's going to be the thing that we can actually pin down and quantify. We're going to get really deep into the budget probably a little earlier this year than we usually do. And as we form our budget, and we'll talk about this more again later, I want this just to be on your mind and you to know as committees that as you prepare over the summer, are there things looking at your budget that you want to know? Are there things that you want to identify? Take a look and see what those line items are. See what the budget is currently, what it was last year. You can find that all in the yearbook. But think about, what questions do I need to ask about that line item in the budget to really get a good grasp of how to plan for this? How to really plan out the budget specifically. For example, social committee, you have one line. You have $400 a year. I don't know when the last time that money was spent. Does that mean that the social committee doesn't spend any money? No. There's a lot going into the kitchen downstairs. There's a lot that goes on in the social, fabric of our community. But there's specific questions you might want to ask. How much coffee do we go through? How many plates do we use? Cups, how much does that all actually cost? Come up with a real budget for it. So your work as committees between now and church camp will be to kind of be asking those questions and familiarizing yourself with your own budget and with the scope of your own committee. What is the scope of what your committee does, and what is the scope of what your committee does? What is the budget of your committee? What information do you need? Church camp weekend, on that Saturday, what I'm hoping for is that we can have kind of a summit of committees and bring some of that information together and start doing that detailed work of the budgetary planning, but also working through how we're going to work on that. Because each of these committees might go about that differently. For example, mission committee. You don't have coffee and cups to measure. You have